Hi, everyone. I'm Lisa Island, and I am here tonight to chat with you all. I'm coming to you from Ocean Grove in Victoria. I hope you can see me all right. These live streams, I've been doing lots of them lately, and my study has perfect light for daytime streaming, but the light at night time is not as great. So forgive the shadows under glasses, but I really can't do it without my glasses because I'm going to need those to read your comments and questions if you do have any. And if you do have questions for me, I can see already a couple of you here. Hi, Danielle, and hi, Jessica. So if you do have questions for me, just pop them in and I will try to get to everyone's questions. I might have to pause a little later on and scroll back in case I miss a few. But anyway, thank you for joining me tonight. As I said, I'm coming to you from Victoria, where I don't know what it's like where you are, but right now, every time I've been up in your part of the world, up in the mid-north coast of New South Wales, it's been absolutely beautiful. It's quite cold here tonight. Very cold, in fact. So I envy you if you have warmer temperatures than we do here in Victoria. So for those of you who don't know me, and I think there's probably a few familiar names here, but for those of you who don't know me, my name's Lisa Island. I am an author, an Australian author of, I was going to say contemporary fiction, but my latest novel, which is called The Secret Life of Shirley Sullivan, is actually a slight departure from contemporary fiction. It definitely has a contemporary storyline, but it also has an historical storyline as well. So I'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. But I thought I'd just tell you a little bit about me and my background. I've been a full-time author for about 7 or 8 years now. So I've been published, I think, for 6 years, but I started writing full-time about 2 years before I was actually published, before I got my first contract. It's really annoying me, that shadow under the glasses. I'm going to sort of turn a little bit and see if that helps. So I come from a background of primary school teaching. I was a primary school teacher for most of my life. I'm just going to pause for a second and say hello. I can see a familiar face, and it's Sharon. Hi, how are you, Sharon? Thank you for joining me tonight. I know Sharon from a group that which is the Romance Writers of Australia. Sharon and I first met there. So lovely to see you here, Sharon. So I came from a background of primary school teaching. That was my career for most of my life, but I also have had many other jobs, and just prior to becoming a full-time writer, I had a position as a part-time teacher, but also ran my own business as a professional organizer. So back in the days before the Marie Kondo made it cool. But we lived, my husband and my boys and I lived in Melbourne, and we decided to make the sea change down here to the coast. So Ocean Grove, for those of you who don't know, and the Ballarat Peninsula, it's not that far from Geelong, which is Victoria's second biggest city. So it's not that far from Geelong, but we're on the coast. So we're in a particularly beautiful spot, surf beach and a tidal river, very lovely spot, not unlike where some of you are, except it's probably a little bit colder here. So we decided to make the sea change, and at that time, my husband said to me, this would be an ideal time for you to take a little bit of time off and put that time into your writing, because he knew that I had a goal of becoming a published author and to make my living from that. So I didn't have a job to come to when I came down here. So we sort of had this idea in mind of a 2-year time period. We thought I could give it a go. I could be out of the workforce probably for that long, and give the actual writing a really good go for full-time for a couple of years, and then if I hadn't managed to get a contract or make a go of it at the end of those 2 years, well, then I would have to probably go back to teaching or find something else to do. So very fortunately for me, I did get a contract right towards the end of that 2 years, and I was off. So I've written 6 novels. My very first novel was in the genre of rural romance. That was accidental. I didn't know that I was writing a rural romance when I wrote it. My first ever teaching job was at a very small country school here in Gippsland in Victoria, in country Victoria. So I was I went there as a very young teacher, as a really, confirmed city girl. And I was a bit hopeless at all the country life, really. I went and lived in a little house by myself in this rural area in a very small place, and had the job as the music and drama teacher at this very lovely little school. And that experience taught me a lot of things. And one of the things that was interesting about it was the fact that I knew nothing about the country and what it took to adapt to living in the country. And so years later, when I went to write my first novel, I was always keen to incorporate that experience into a book. And that eventually did become my very first novel, and it was accidentally a rural romance. So after I'd written that book and it was published, my publishers, which was Harlequin Australia, they wanted more of the same type of work. So I wrote another 2 rural romances. But when I came to write my next book, my 4th book, which is this book here, it's called The Shape of Us. This was a story that I'd been carrying around in my heart for a long time. It's a book about friendship, about women who meet in an online, it's a weight loss chat forum, but it's a book about friendship and about being comfortable in your own skin. And I wanted to address issues of fat shaming and body image for women, but I particularly wanted to talk about online friendship. And so this book was, I carried around, like I said, in my heart for quite some time. And I was trying to write a 4th rural romance, but I was a little bit blocked, a little bit stuck, and just wasn't coming. Sorry, just get rid of that book. Wasn't coming really easily to me, and I just wasn't enjoying the story the way I'd enjoyed the previous ones. So I thought, actually another writer, a writer friend, Rachel Johns, who at that time was probably queen of rural romance. She's also branched out into other forms of fiction as well as rurals. But she said to me, you know what, why don't you write that book why don't you give that book that you've been, holding on to, that idea that you've been holding on to for a long time, why don't you give that a go while you're blocked on this rural romance? Why don't you just write that thing that's in your heart? You don't have to finish it. You don't have to really do anything with it. Just, get some of those ideas down on the page, and it might unblock you, get the creative juices working again, and then you can go back to the rural. So I sat down and started to write The Shape of Us. Didn't write an outline or anything, because at that point in time it wasn't even intended to actually be the novel. It was just a bit of brainstorming, just a bit of writing to get me going. And 120,000 words later, the novel was finished, and it wasn't a rural romance. So that's how I sort of switched genres from rural romance to contemporary women's fiction. It wasn't then, and it isn't now. It's never really been a choice of genre for me. It's just the story that is in my heart at the time, the thing that I'm burning to write at the time that I get started. And then I worry about genre later. But so I've written now 3, I guess you would call them contemporary women's fiction books. So the next one was this one, The Art of Friendship, which is another book obviously, about friendship. This is about what happens when you about childhood friends in adulthood. So I guess I was exploring the question: if you met your childhood friends as strangers as an adult, would you still choose them all over again? So that's what that book was about. But then when I went to write this book, which is the latest one, The Secret Life of Shirley Sullivan, I was actually writing, once again, I was writing another book. It was a book called Pieces of Me, and it was a book about grief. I had an idea about writing a book about a woman who was dealing with the grief of her son's death through running. And I quite liked this idea because I'm a runner. I know I might not look like it, but I love a run. Running is my preferred form of exercise. And I have never run a marathon. I'd really like to, but I think that's a dream. That's a bridge too far for me. But I do like a short run. And so every day when I was running, when I run or when I walk is where I get a lot of story ideas. And so the idea for Pieces of Me came to me when I was running, because at the time I was going through a few issues of my own, and I would often work those things out as I was running. When I don't feel great about things, exercise is a way I channel my anxiety in the way I work through things. So I kind of came upon this idea of this woman who had something tragic happen to her and who decides to run the New York Marathon. And I decided on New York because New York, other than Melbourne, New York is my favourite city on earth. And I thought, and that it's an iconic race. So I thought, right, this is what this book is going to be about. And I wrote 40,000 words of that novel. But I got to the 40,000 word mark and I realised it wasn't working. And it was a very dark book because grief is obviously a very hard topic to work through. And I found that I was actually making myself depressed by writing it. I got to the point where I didn't want to come to the page. So each day, like, I was procrastinating and finding other things to do. So I called my agent and had a talk to her, and I said, look, I really don't think this book is working. And she said to me, just set it aside. Maybe now's not the time to write it. What else have you got? What other ideas have you got? And I had a few. I had a list. And right down the bottom of the list was the idea for this, but it was only a partial it had only been a partial idea. And these sort of things merged at the same time. So I said to my agent, I've got this kind of idea about writing a road trip book, but with a pair of elderly protagonists. And she said, okay, tell me more. And well, what had given me the idea? Actually, I'll tell you what the book's about first, and then I'll tell you where I got the idea from. So the book is about 79-year-old Shirley Sullivan, who steals her husband, Frank, who's 83, from his nursing home in suburban Sydney and takes him on the run down the coast, not your coast, a little bit further south, down the south coast of New South Wales, because this is an area that I know reasonably well. So, and I always like to set my book somewhere where I know the terrain, where I know the landscape well. So she takes him on this road trip, and the road trip is something that Frank has always wanted to do his whole life with Shirley in a combi, and it for one reason or another, it's never happened. And so Shirley has decided that it's going to happen now because Frank is slipping away from her. He has dementia, and she can see he's slipping more and more each day, and she's afraid that soon he won't remember her. So she decides that she wants to take him while he's still got enough of himself, enough of his memory left to appreciate the trip. So that, and as I said to you before, that's the contemporary part that I was talking about, my contemporary fiction. But now there's there's the historical side that I'm going to tell you. Susan's just asked a question about, and I'm just going to read this question to you because it kind of leads into what I'm talking about. It says, do you think you need to have personal experience in your own life to write about it in a novel? Do you do much research or rely on imagination? I think it's a little bit of both, Susan, and I'm going to talk about research in a little bit later on. So if I forget, just pop that question up again for me when I get to the research bit. But I think it's, to answer the question very quickly and very simply, it's a little bit of both. So with this particular storyline, as I said, it's got a historical storyline running through it. And when I said to my agent, look, I've got this idea about Frank and Shirley, or this elderly, I didn't know their names then, this elderly couple, and they've always wanted to do this road trip, and she steals him. And my agent said to me, yeah, it sounds really good. I really like the idea, but it needs something more, something more compelling than just the road trip. And she said, why are they doing it? Why is she so driven? And my answer at that time was, well, because he's always wanted to do it and he's slipping away from her. And she said to me, yeah, that's good, but I'd like you to dig a bit deeper and find out why. Why is it so important? And that was when I realised that Shirley would need to have a very big secret. Now, at that time, I didn't know what the secret was, and I didn't know what the secret was all the way through until I got to the part of, like, I don't know, halfway through the book, I think, before I realised exactly what the secret was. So anyway, I was thinking about that, and as I was thinking about it, we were actually living, our house had been flooded, and we were living in temporary accommodation just around the corner from our actual house while our house was being repaired. And a whole heap of my belongings had been damaged in the flood, and one of the things that was damaged was this box of memorabilia that belonged to my parents. And my parents had died over 10 years before. And when they died, I packed up a lot of their stuff, and there was a lot of personal things of Mum's from her bedroom, from her bedside table, that I just packed into a box. I knew that they were important to her, but I didn't really, at the time I was grief-stricken and didn't want to go through them, and so there were some letters and things, but I wasn't really sure what the letters were or who they were from or anything like that. So after while we were staying in this temporary accommodation, and I'd had the conversation with my agent about the idea for the story, I was simultaneously, going through this stuff from our house, and I came across this. I'm just picking this up here. Came across, this actually wasn't the box that it was in, but the contents of this box were in the damaged box from my home. And what's in it are these letters. There were 67 letters. I'll just hold those up a bit closer because see, to the stamp of the Queen. These were written in the early 1960s. The first one's, I think, in 1961. So there's 67 of these letters, and they are almost exactly half and half, from my mum to my dad and from my dad to my mum. So this is a letter to my dad, obviously, written by my mother, and here's one to my mum, written by my dad. And this, as well as all the letters, there were some old photos, and this photo in particular really stood out to me, and as this young couple in love, and I kind of went, I think I can do something with this. So armed with these letters, I actually sat down and wrote and put them in chronological order, and then read them. And it was like reading a novel. It was like reading it was the story of my parents' love affair, from the time they met in 1961 until about 1963, where they got engaged and then subsequently married. And the reason they were writing to each other is that Mum lived in Geelong, and Dad lived in East Gippsland in a little place called Lindenow. And so they met. Dad was a surf lifesaver, and if any of you've read the book, you'll know that Frank in his youth was a surf lifesaver. So yeah, my mum lived in Geelong, Dad lived in Gippsland, and they met at a dance in Geelong at the Palais Dance Hall in Geelong, and wrote to each other and maintained their relationship that way. So I had these beautiful, letters as a resource, and it made me realise that I could use that as the inspiration for the backstory to these two characters, and it would give me some idea of what life was like for the young Frank and Shirley when they met, because the letters are full of really rich historical detail. Obviously, I mean, you don't know it's historical detail when you're writing it, but reading it all these years later, over 50 years later, it's like, well, it's history. So there's things in there like my mum describing watching President Kennedy's funeral on TV. There's the music they listened to, the places they went, the films of the time, all that sort of stuff. So that gave me a real primary source to go to for research. So Susan, that kind of ties into it too. So, but the story, I mean, obviously I don't want to tell my mum and dad's story because quite frankly, it would be quite boring. My mum and dad met in the 1960s. They fell in love. They got married. They had 2 children, and they kind of lived happily ever after, which is very nice, but it doesn't make for good fiction. So Frank and Shirley's story is not my mum and dad's story, but I did use some of the settings. So the where mum grew up in Geelong, I used that as Shirley's sort of background as well. Places that my mum worked. So as a young woman, she worked at the Valley Mill in Geelong here, and Shirley works there too, because these were places that I've been told stories about since I was a child. So it was very easy for me to imagine what it was like. But I did do extra research to make sure that my memories of tales told to me or family stories told to me matched up with the actual historical facts. So, and I used my dad's childhood home, which was Lindenau, as Frank's childhood home. So I stole things from my parents' life, but it's definitely not their story. So, okay, so that was the letters, and then I knew Frank and Shirley had, I knew Shirley would have to have this secret, and so that was, the whole thing sort of came together really easily then. The original inspiration for the story was actually outside of my family, and it's from a couple that I don't know and that I've never been able to track down, despite a little bit of research. I've never been able to track this story down again, but years and years ago, when my mum was still alive, I was waiting for her to take her to a medical appointment, and I was flicking through the newspaper at her house, and I found a story about a couple, an octogenarian couple who had escaped from their nursing home, gone on the run from the law or from the authorities for about 4 or 5 days, and they were actually captured by the police at one time. And obviously it's not a crime to escape from your nursing home, but their welfare, people were concerned for their welfare. So they were captured by the police, and the woman of the couple actually talked their way out of it. It got the police to believe that it was mistaken identity and that they were not the couple in question. And they gave the police the slip and went on the run for a couple more days. And I just thought that was kind of like a real Bonnie and Clyde moment. And I loved it. I loved the idea that that they had such spark and gumption, and they were this wily sort of old couple. So I was really I was quite keen to tell their story. But obviously I don't know what their story is, so that's where the imagination comes in. So I guess maybe I'm going to talk a little bit now about the research for the book, and then I might do a little reading. Actually, no, I might do the reading first, because then I can explain a little bit more about the research. So I'm just going to read to you. This is from chapter 1, and it is right towards the end of chapter 1. And I will... Okay, so I'll just read this. I'll just give you a little bit of background, Shirley has just arrived at the nursing home to see her husband, and he's out in the garden. So she's been directed out into the garden. Frank is sitting in a wicker chair under the shade of the jacaranda tree. His legs are stretched out in front of him, and his trouser legs are rolled up so the skin catches the dappled sunlight. He's always been a sun worshipper. My pink-coated lips form a wide smile as I wave to him, but he continues to stare into the middle distance. There's not a flicker of recognition on his face. Today is not a good day. One of the male carers, a new one whose name I can't recall, places a garden chair next to Frank and beckons for me to sit. I thank him and he nods and moves away to give us a modicum of privacy. Not that there's really any such thing in this place. I sit and turn my head to Frank, resisting the urge to touch him. It's lovely out here today. He looks at me and I see the confusion in his eyes. I think it's my voice that does it. The sound is familiar, but he can't quite place me. It is indeed. I try not to let my disappointment show on my face. I'm grateful for the days he still recognises me, although they're happening less and less. It's been months since he recognised Fiona. I think that's the reason she keeps finding excuses not to visit. The pain of seeing her beloved daddy like this is more than she can bear. Most of the time, I have little patience for her discomfort. Do you think I like seeing him this way? Oh, I've lost my space there. I've lost my place for just a second, sorry. Do you think I like seeing him the way he is? I've said on more than one occasion, this isn't about us, it's about your father. But on days like today, when Frank's eyes glaze over and he treats me like a friendly stranger, I resolve to be more sympathetic towards my daughter. I point to the skin of to the exposed skin of his legs. I hope you have sunscreen on. Easy to get burned in beautiful weather like this. He screws up his nose. Sunscreen. Can't stand the stuff. Makes the sand stick to your skin. He smiles indulgently. You sound like my wife. She's always trying to get me to put on sun cream when I'm on patrol. She's fair-skinned, you see. Only has to look at the sun and she gets burned. But not me. My skin's tough as old boots. Even if I go pink at first, I end up tanned. My Shirley can't seem to understand that. I bite my tongue and refrain from talking about skin cancer. He's had half a dozen basal cell carcinomas cut out over the past decade. But of course, the Frank sitting next to me doesn't know that. He's back in his youth. Instead, I say, so you like the beach then? He nods. It's my second home. I'm a lifesaver, you know, at Bankura. Lovely little beach, best spot in the world if you ask me. He closes his eyes for a moment. When he opens them again, they're brighter, as though he's just had a wonderful idea. Look, you couldn't do me a favour, could you? You couldn't give a bloke a lift. I need to get back home to Shirl. She's probably worried sick by now. I got lost somehow and ended up in this place. I keep telling them that I need to go home, but no one's listening. I'm listening. He breaks into a heartwarming smile. So you'll take me home? I want to take him in my arms and promise him everything will be all right. But today I'm a stranger to him and I don't want to cause him further distress by crossing any boundaries. The staff tell me when he's like this, it's best to play along as much as possible. I can't today, I say carefully. I don't have my car. His face falls momentarily before he regains his composure. Tomorrow, then? It pains me to hear the desperation in his voice. Yes, love, I say, and it's a blessed relief that this time I don't have to lie. Tomorrow. Okay, so that's the end of the first. That's the end of the first chapter. I just thought I would read that first because you can see that obviously there's a large theme of dementia. The theme of Frank's dementia is quite important to the story. And I have Frank, he is lucid at some times, as you can see from Shirley starts by saying today is not a good day. So sometimes he recognises her and sometimes he doesn't. And that can change not just from day to day, but from hour to hour or minute to minute. It was really, really important to me to get the dementia aspect right, because I'm aware that many people are living with dementia and many people are living with people and caring for them, people who do suffer from dementia, or they have loved ones in homes. And it was really important to me to make sure that I was representing those people as accurately as I possibly could. Older Frank is actually, a lot of his behaviours are based on my own grandfather, who lived to the ripe old age of 92 and was very well until he was around about 90. But around about 90, he became unable to care for himself, and we ended up making the very difficult decision to place him in a nursing home. And when we sort of look back on it, for a few years before that, we'd had some other measures in place. There was a time in his 80s where we'd had to take his license away from him, take his car away from him, because we felt he was no longer safe on the roads for himself or for other road users. So that was a very difficult time in his life and in ours, my mother, my aunts, and my own. And then, but other than that, he was okay for a while. But then we slowly over time, we noticed him starting to slip, probably from the sort of his late 80s. And then once he turned about 90, it became clear that it was not safe for him to live in the home by himself anymore. And so he was placed into a nursing home. So a lot of Frank's behaviours came from my own direct experience with my grandfather and his experience of Alzheimer's. And of course, every dementia patient is an individual and they are different. And so their behaviours are not all going to be the same. But there are some patterns depending on what type of dementia you have, what's causing the dementia, and what part of the brain it affects. There are certain behaviours that dementia patients have in common, but personality is still a part of that big picture. And so I had my own personal experience, but as I said, it was very important for me to do research. So what I did was I spent a lot of time talking to people who have dementia and at different stages of dementia. So recently diagnosed patients right through to people who were in the end stages of Alzheimer's. I also spoke to their carers. I read a lot of first-hand accounts of Alzheimer's patients and particularly carer accounts of caring for someone who has Alzheimer's. And I also became a dementia friend, which is an online course that you can do. And I recommend, every time I do one of these talks, I recommend this to people. You just Google it, dementia friend. It's a really simple course. It will only take a very short amount of time. Like, I'm not talking days or weeks. I'm talking like half an hour on your computer at home. And it's just runs you through a few simple videos and real life scenarios, talking to people who have dementia and giving you some ideas of how we, as people who are not living with dementia, can make life easier, and for people who do have dementia, in terms of being the ways that we can behave when we meet someone with dementia in our everyday life, whether it be at the shops or at work or wherever. Just gives you some ideas of simple things that you can do that can make dementia patients' lives easier for them. So that was my dementia research, and I really hope I got that right. I've had some very nice feedback so far from readers who've read it, who have someone with dementia in their life. So I really do hope that research has paid off. So getting back to Susan's question again, I think real life experience does help, but obviously you don't have to have the real life experience, but you really do need I'm sorry, my dog has just wandered in, so you might get a nice big boxer head in here. Oh no, she's collecting her toy and she's wandering off. The joys of producing video at home. Obviously you do need an imagination, and you need because everyday life is generally not that interesting. Sometimes it is. Some stories, some truth is stranger than fiction, but most of our everyday lives are not that interesting. So you need a little bit of a combination of both, a little bit of experience in things, and you can, of course, many people write books about things that are completely outside their experience, but what's important is to to do lots of research and to talk to people with those experiences so that they are represented properly. So another aspect of the story that I had to research was the actual setting. So even though I'm very familiar with the Geelong parts of the story, I was less familiar with the south coast of New South Wales. I do know it. We holiday there quite frequently, my husband and I. My husband's originally from New South Wales, from Sydney, but he has always his whole life holidayed there. And I'm not sure. My sister-in-law lives now on the mid north coast, so she lives at Foster, or not actually at Foster, but in that sort of area. So I'm not sure if she's watching tonight, but so I have got a bit of an affinity with that area, but sorry, I'm saying with your area, but not so much with the south coast myself, more my husband. And so like I said, we've holidayed there, but I really wanted to have that really, deep experience where you immerse yourself in the area. So I did the road trip myself. Not in a combi van because I haven't driven a manual car for a really long time, so I was really a friend has got a combi, and it said to me, if you want to do it in a combi van, you can give mine a go. But I didn't think I didn't, trust myself to drive it all the way down the coast. So I drove from Melbourne up to Yass and then cut across to Bateman's Bay and went down. So missed your area of the world, but, went down that very lovely south part. So I went to all the settings that are in the book and spent the same amount of time there that Frank and Shirley were there. So I did the exact trip. If they ate somewhere, so for instance, when they're at Mossy Point, Shirley goes to the coffee shop there. I went to that coffee shop. If I mention an IGA, I went to that IGA. So, I know that's an extreme probably amount of research, and you probably didn't need to do it, but it was also a lot of fun. But I do think it does bring some authenticity to the novel when you are able, like I took lots and lots of notes as I was driving down. So I'd drive a little way and stop at a beach, and I'd take heaps of photos and write lots and lots of notes. So even things like where the sun would hit, like, so if it was a particular time of day, I would look at things like where the tide might be, where the sun might hit at that time of year, that sort of thing, because there's nothing worse if you live in a particular area and someone's chosen to write about your town or your geographical area and they get it wrong. I find that annoying when it's where I live. If someone's, if an author's just sort of looked it up on Google Maps and they've clearly got something wrong. So that was the setting research that I did. Another thing that I did, there's a theme of there's a sort of a gentle feminism theme running through the book in terms of the changes for women from the 1960s right through to now, where Shirley the time we're living in now, and so the changes that a woman who was born in the 1940s, who's lived into her 80s, would see, and some of the changes that she could expect to not just experience, but actually have some sort of impact on in her life. And so in the book, Shirley reads The Female Eunuch by Germaine Greer, and this is a book that I hadn't actually read myself, so I decided that I would take that on and read that book. I can't believe it's taken me till I'm in my 50s to read that book, and if you haven't read it, I can thoroughly recommend. I mean, some of the things are very out there, and I'm not saying that I agree with everything in the book, but it was a really interesting historical read. So the women in the book, Shirley and her friend Rita, are quite affected by The Female Eunuch and Germaine Greer in their time. I did quite a lot of that sort of research, and we're very fortunate here in the Geelong region to have a beautiful library. So we have a gorgeous, massive library in the centre of Geelong, and it's got a heritage centre, cultural and heritage centre attached to the library. And I spent a lot of time in there accessing photos of Geelong in the 1960s. I was lucky enough to have my parents' photos, and my aunt, who lives in Geelong, is in her 70s, and she and one of my mum's childhood friends provided me with a lot of photos of Geelong and of my mum and my dad, but particularly my mum growing up at that time. So yeah, a lot of research went into this book, but it wasn't just, as I said, it wasn't just the historical timeline that that needed researching. A lot of the contemporary things needed researching as well. So there's all sorts of things in the book. I mean, it sounds like it's a complex novel, but it's actually a very, I would say, a gentle and simple novel about women's lives. But the things that affect all of us are in there. So there's a lot of stuff about childbirth and what happened to women in childbirth in the 60s, and when things go right and when things go wrong, and sort of when people suffer depression after a birth. All those types of issues were explored, and I had to do that. Was quite tricky to research because there's not actually a lot of information about other than talking. I had a lot of first-hand accounts, so I could talk to people who gave birth in that era, but there's not a lot of some of the records have been destroyed. I was looking for particular records I'm stumbling a little bit here because I don't want to give away spoilers to people who haven't read the book, but there were particular incidents that happened which I suspected had happened, but I couldn't. The record keeping of the time was not accurate enough for me to actually, know whether it had happened or not. So I'm just going to quickly scroll back here and see if there are any questions. Oh, Sharon says, how interesting is the inspiration for the story? I have written a short play about an old lady wanting to escape her nursing home. How wonderful, Sharon. And it's funny, because often when I talk about this, last year when I toured Perth with Rachel Johns and Sally Hepworth, and I just finished writing the story and I just sold it to Penguin. So I was talking a little bit about it to audiences then, and I did have a couple of writers either say that they had come up with that idea, or they, what a good idea it was to write. So I think for me, one of the things that I was really interested in portraying is an older woman, an older protagonist who is not at the mercy of everyone else. So she is in the beginning, but she breaks free of that. I wanted to show how capable older women can be, that older women don't have to be stereotyped into just being the grandma. Of course, Shirley is a grandmother, and she's a beautiful grandmother, and she has a really wonderful relationship with her granddaughters, particularly one of them, Lou, who becomes an accessory when they are on the run. Lou doesn't go with them, but she provides help through a network of I won't tell you in case you haven't read it who, but through one of Lou's social networks, she provides her grandparents with assistance, which helps them to evade the authorities for such a long time. But it does concern me, the portrayal of older women in fiction, that they're often portrayed the same way and sometimes played for comedic value. And I think that there's much more to women, all women, about women as they age don't necessarily just have to be portrayed as sweet little old grannies. Even if they are sweet grannies, it doesn't mean that they're not interested in other things, and it doesn't mean that's completely who they are. So that was one of the themes that I really wanted to explore in the book. And one one of the ways I did that was through use of technology. So I've got a lot of older friends, or I've got older readers, and I've got aunts, and I've come to know a lot of older women. I had older mentors when I was teaching, and I'm still friends with those women. And there seems to be this idea in fiction and in the media that anyone over 50 cannot operate a computer, can't use a phone, and there may be some social networking things that are beyond some people, and there may be some people that fit into that stereotype, but not every older woman, not every woman over 70 is incapable of using an iPad. Not every woman over 70 can't send an email. In fact, most of them can, in my experience. So I wanted to portray that in fiction. And one of the things that Shirley does is she really subverts that idea, and she uses the stereotypes of older women to work for her. So she knows that people think that she's just a sweet, silly little old lady that wouldn't be able to operate a computer, or wouldn't know how to navigate Facebook or Instagram. And she uses that to play dumb and to get people to do things for her, or to get away with things. So so that's another theme through the novel, is older people, particularly older women, their invisibility and their ability to use technology. I'm just wondering if anyone's got any questions, because I've got, I'm just thinking I've got about another 10 minutes or so left. So if anyone has any questions, please pop them up now so that I can get to them before the end. Now, speaking of the end, I want to talk to you about the end of the book, and I'm not going to obviously give away what the end is, but when my process is quite loose as a writer. I'm not someone that does a lot of tight outlining or plotting. All writers come to the page in a different way, and I'm in the writing world, people will call it either plotting or pantsing. So if you're a plotter, you're someone that really tightly plots and outlines. Someone like Jane Harper, for instance, if you're familiar with Jane Harper's work, and she's an amazingly talented writer. She really strictly plots every single part of her novel before she starts to write. And I'm kind of at the other end of that, where I would be called a pantser, and you're called pantsers because we're writing by the seat of our pants. I've got a loose idea of what the novel's about and the themes that I want to explore and the ideas that I'm trying to get across, but I'm very much led by my characters, and I don't outline too much. And every single time I've tried to outline really tightly, it's led me into trouble. And that novel that I talked about right at the beginning of the talk, when I was discussing Pieces of Me, which was the novel about grief, that was not particularly tightly plotted, but I plotted the beginning of it, and I really got sick of writing it. And so with Shirley, I didn't know the end when I started. I had no idea what the end was. And I think when you get to the end, you'll know what I mean. There's been a little bit of controversy about the end of the story. So in terms of the ending, and I knew that I love the ending. It's my favourite ending of one of my books. I'm very happy with the way the story ended. However, I do know that often readers want to know what happened next, what happened after the end, what happened to all the characters. Were they happy after this ending? And so I'm letting readers know that I have written a secret epilogue. So if you have read the book, or when you do read the book, if you choose to, and you get to the end and you think, well, that's great, but I would love to know what happened next, you just get in contact with me, and you can do that via my Facebook page, which is just Lisa Island, or through my website, or through Instagram. I'm on Instagram as Lisa Island Books, or you can message me through my website. Just that's also lisaislandbooks.com. If you message me there at any of those places, I'll get that message and just say I've finished the book. I would love to read the epilogue, please, and I will send you a special secret link if you promise me that you won't share it with anyone who hasn't read the book. I'll send you a secret epilogue that will give you, that ties the story up just a little bit more. So sort of gives you exactly, down the track, a few months down the track, what's happened after the end of the story in sort of like a year later. Okay, so I have got there's a few questions here. So Sharon has said, what is your next story? I am writing at the moment, and I'm actually a little bit stuck on this, so I can't really tell you too much about it, but I can give you just a very loose outline, because as I said, I don't outline too tightly. But it's another story about an older protagonist, Gwen. Gwen lives in a country town in Victoria, and I didn't plan this, but this is also got a little bit of a technology theme. I didn't realise this, but actually all my books have got some sort of, all my contemporary fiction books, not the rurals, but all my contemporary fiction books have something to say about the online world, and in a positive way, I think. So, which I'm just kind of realising that now. But so Gwen, at the start of this book, it's called Computing for Seniors. That's my working title. I don't know whether it will end up having that title, but it's called Computing for Seniors at this stage. And it is basically about a woman who's had some hardship in her life, and it's made her become, other people in the town might say, a little bit bitter. She wouldn't describe herself that way. She would describe herself as very practical. But she likes to complain a lot. So she likes to ring the council and complain. And right at the beginning of the novel, Gwen finds out that she's no longer able to phone the council and log her complaints that way, that she's going to need to log on via the council's portal and log her complaints online. And this is problematic for Gwen because she doesn't, she's resisted all technology thus far. She doesn't have a smartphone. She doesn't have any type of computer in her home. And she's informed by the council that if she attends the library, the local library, that the librarians will help her to log her complaints. But she's not really that thrilled with that idea. So she signs up at the local community centre to do a course called Computing for Seniors, and she meets a whole heap of other people who shape her in some ways good and some ways bad. And it's about it's a little bit about how the ideas of others can affect the way we feel about ourselves and about issues. And it's another grandmother-granddaughter story, because also at the beginning of the book, her young teenage granddaughter comes to live with her for a short time while the granddaughter's mum takes a job that takes her overseas for a short period of time. I'm a little bit stuck. I'm just going to tell you this at the moment. I'm a little bit stuck because I started writing this book before the current pandemic, and I'm about 30,000 words in, and the book was supposed to finish. It was supposed to take place this past summer, and it was supposed to finish at Easter. But everyone being in lockdown due to coronavirus does not work with my story. And I'm trying to grapple with that at the moment. I'm trying to grapple with, what do I do? Do I just ignore coronavirus and write it as if the coronavirus never happened here in Australia, that there never was a lockdown? Is that what I do? Or, which I don't think that is what I'm going to do. But these are the questions I'm asking myself. Do I shift the timeline slightly, and I'm maybe angling for that. Although I was going to have an Easter fair at the climax of the book, and I really liked that idea. So I'm going to be a bit sad to miss out on that. I could maybe not be specific about the timeline, but that messes with my head because I'm someone that likes to place the story in a particular setting in a particular time, because we've talked a lot about how I research things and how things make sense to me. And so having it in no set time, I really struggle with that. So I don't know whether I'm going to be able to do that or not. So I'm at 30,000 words, and this book, The Secret Life of Shirley Sullivan, came out on the 28th of April, and I've been extraordinarily busy doing lots of live things like this because we also had to change. I was supposed to go on a tour, and I now couldn't go on the tour because we went into lockdown, and thankfully lovely libraries like your library at Mid Coast Libraries and lots of other libraries have adapted really quickly to put on live events like this, so streamed events. But I've been particularly busy doing this, and I really still haven't got my head around the new book. But that's it in essence. So watch this space. I'll let you know what happens. So there's I've got probably time for another one or two questions. Great question from Sharon, who says, who comes up with the covers for your books? I love the cover of Shirley Sullivan. Do you have any input? It depends really. Every author is different. Obviously, I'm published by Penguin Random House, and what a lot of people don't realise is that when you sign a contract with a publisher, the deal is you're giving them your book, selling them your book. You're giving them the rights to sell your book. And so, and in reality, it kind of doesn't work out this way because publishers are always collaborative. But technically, I have no right to have any say in the cover because I have signed over the rights to Penguin Random House. They could put really anything on the cover and I wouldn't be able to do anything about it because they have the right to do that. In reality, it's a much more collaborative process than that, because obviously it's much easier for me to go out and promote a book that I love the cover of, that I'm happy with. And the publisher, publishers are book people. They love books, they love authors, and they want their authors to be happy. So there is a lot of collaboration. I guess it depends. Like when I was a brand new author, I had very little input, and I sought very little input because I was just happy to have my book published. And to be honest, I still don't seek a lot of input because I'm not a particularly visual person. What I like visually is not necessarily going to be marketable. I like quite different things. I like quite plain covers. I haven't got it here, but actually, I'm just going to reach across. I am quite happy with this idea. Like, this is one of my favourite bookshops in the world. This is Persephone. These books are from Persephone Books in London, and all the covers are the same. These are all mainly mid-century, mid-20th century female writers that have been underpublished, and Persephone has published their stories. Really worth looking them up and grabbing some of their books. It's fantastic reads. But so, like, I'm quite happy with that cover, whereas, of course, I'm sure that's not going to necessarily grab people's attention when they're in the bookshop. So what I'm saying is I'm not the best person to decide on the cover. I know there are other authors who are visual people and who have strong ideas about what they should see on their cover. I never have any clue about what I want on the cover until the designers start showing me options. Usually what happens is I'm given several options and I pick which one I like the most, and then we work, and then usually the publisher will work from that. But with Shirley, they sent me this option, said, this is what we're working on right now. Just we want to feel for if you like the concept or not, and I loved it. And so there was no need to shop around any more options. There was no need for them to come up with anything else. We all loved it. We made a few very minor changes. We changed the colour of the font on, I think we changed the font colour on my name. And we sort of pulled these these leaves up a little bit because they originally hung down sort of about that far. That's it. They were the only changes we made. Title, just while we're on that, because we've got like 1 minute left, and I'm just making sure that I haven't missed any. I think I have got, I can't really scroll on this computer. It's not working, but I don't think I have actually missed any questions. So just while in our last few minutes, our last minute or so, I'll just talk about title. I'm terrible at coming up with titles. I did come up with The Secret Life of Shirley Sullivan. I'm very happy to say that that's really the first one of my books that has had gone through without anyone wanting to change the title. All the others have not had my original title, which is a very good thing because I'm terrible at coming up with titles, and none of the titles I had I was very happy with, but I'm not someone, some writers I know come up with the title first and then write to that, like that, when they know they've got a good, strong story idea when they have the title, whereas that's not the case for me. Often I have got the title for, I've had the title for Shirley and I have got the title Computing for Seniors, so I do like that. And I do think, I do hope that if that one gets across the line that I get to keep that one, because I think it's kind of a cute title. I don't know, you tell me what you think. But anyway, I think I've probably talked enough, but I do want to thank you for having me as your guest tonight. It's been really lovely to chat to you all, and thanks for the questions. I will just let you know that for those of you who do enjoy a reader group, I have a reader group with Rachel Johns and Sally Hepworth. There are a couple of people in here tonight that are from that group, and I thank them very much. They are very loyal, lovely followers who often pop in when I'm doing a live thing to say hello, so I really do appreciate their support. The group is called The Secret Life of Authors. It's not a group for writers, it's a group for readers, although writers are very welcome, very, very welcome indeed, but the focus is not on writing. The focus is on reading. So, and we do read-alongs in the group, which is like a book club. So if you're interested in that, you can pop along, just Google Secret Life of Authors on Facebook. Anyway, thank you so much for having me tonight. It's been lovely to chat to you all, and happy reading. Bye.